So I do believe we all know how when Lavan gives Leah to Yaakov, that Rachel gives Leah something besides that they had prepared before. But as Lavan Cutler says, that all of Lavan's trickery could not have happened if Hashem did not want it to. For it is impossible to think that Yaakov did not know that it was not Rachel until the morning. And even through Rachel's incredible selflessness, and Lavan's equally incredible dishonesty, the marriage had to work. Because Hashem wanted for his plans to work, he needed Yaakov and Leah to become husband and wife. In fact, Leah became the primary wife because she had as many sons as all of Yaakov's wives had combined. And even she was buried with Yaakov in Ma'at HaMachpelah and not Rachel. So on the wedding night, Yaakov noticed nothing wrong because spiritually he knew he was with the woman he had to be with. Not only that, but the Michtav Meliyahu says that Rachel and Leah both played a special role for Yaakov. That Rachel was intended for Yaakov in this world, and Leah, I'm not 100% sure what this means, but Leah was intended for him in the next. That Rachel was the wife of Yaakov, and Leah was the wife of Yisrael. That, the name meaning he was more spiritually higher. In fact, we can see this in the fact that out of Rachel came Yosef, who saved his family from the famine, and out of Leah came both Levi and Yehuda, who the priesthood and Mashiach and kinghood comes from. So, for Yaakov had to become Yisrael, so he had to marry Leah. And so, Hashem, even though Yaakov may not have wanted it, made sure that Yaakov married Leah. And Rachel, as the Midrash declares, Yaakov, the only reason that he worked was because of Rachel. Rachel, the beautiful one, in fact, that those who are tethered to the physical world noticed her. And this represents the mission that ultimately Yaakov, or us, Yaakov's descendants, will be conquering this world. Because Yaakov had the task of doing this in this world and making the resources of this world to Hashem. So we had also to be tethered to Rachel. This is why, at the very beginning, when he first saw Rachel, he knew that they were destined to be together.
I'll have to take some lessons in public speaking. That went with a punch. Very good, lovely, right? I mentioned many times that if I come across something interesting during the week, I think it's worthwhile mentioning it. Last week we didn't get together, so we missed out on quite a Sedra. What was last week's Sedra? October, that's right. And one has to know, and it's very important to know, that if you just read the Chumash and the stories of the Chumash as they're written, so you're not getting the message. Just as you cannot understand Torah unless you have Torah Shabbat Peh. Now that's quite obvious when you get a passage like Tefillin, for example. They shall be as fragments between your eyes. What, when, how, what shape, what colour when you put them on. There's a vast amount of dealing of which apply to Tefillin. You cannot understand it without the Torah Shabbat Peh. The same thing applies exactly with the stories of the Torah. If you read the story of the Torah and you haven't got the Torah Shabbat that goes with it, you haven't understood the story at all. And now, for example, the story of Esau and Yaakov, if you take that story and you just read it as it's written, you might come out with an impression that poor old Esau had a hard deal. First of all, we find the poor fellow, it comes in Hu Oyef, and he's feeling faint. And Yaakov Avinu takes the opportunity. The poor fellow is about to depart from this world. And Yaakov says, I'll only give you food if you sell your birthright. What kind of behavior is that? Then we hear the whole story how Yaakov in his heart wanted to bless Esau. And Yaakov and Rivka, they organized the whole thing. And it comes out, he blesses Yaakov instead of Esau. So, but if you study Chazal, what Chazal say about this, you have a completely different picture. Absolute completely picture. For example, it said Hu Oyef, and he was faint. Chazal say he was faint. On that day, he committed the 3 cardinal averas: Hilul Haroyos, Shvichus Damim, and Avodah Zarah. Shvichus Damim, murder, immorality, and Avodah Zarah. He comes in, and they're cooking the lentils. What's going on in the house? It's the Shiva of Lavan Avinu. Avraham Avinu who died, and the family are sitting Shiva. Now it's a known fact in this world that people, when it comes to dealing with death, they get a bit more serious. When a person never dreams of going to shul every day, but when his father or mother pass away, so he goes to shul to say Kaddish. When it comes to Raya, everybody puts on their couples, everybody gets serious. Esau turns up, and they're sitting Shiva for Avraham Avinu. Great loss in the whole family. And in that situation, he's prepared to sell his spirituality. Usually in that situation, one gets a bit more serious and you think of the person's not going to live forever. In that situation, and it might interest you to know as well, it says, Yaakov nosan le'Esau, and Yaakov gave to Esau lechem u'mezil adoshim. Lechem is bread. He gave him, first of all, bread. Once he's got bread, then the situation's not desperate anymore. So he might say, well, he couldn't. Esau was faint and he took the situation, but once he's eaten bread, why'd you go and sell the birthright? Because as far as Esau was concerned, it was of absolutely no value to him whatsoever. For a pot of lentils, he was prepared to sell all the spirituality of what went with being the firstborn. We also know that the Torah doesn't come along and tell us fairy stories, nice little stories. It says when Yaakov and Esau were born, so first Esau was born, then Yaakov came out holding the heel of Esau. Nice little story. What does the Torah want to tell us here? Nice little, I wouldn't say fairy story, but must be a message here. So the Shimshon Father says something very beautiful. He says a person, what you despise, what you have no regard for, you tread with your heel. It's of no consequence, no value. What you hold in your hand is very precious. If you're looking after a precious diamond, you don't put it anywhere, you keep it in your hand all the time. I was once, somebody asked me to bring to Israel $100,000. We took a whole satchel. I've never seen so much money in my life, right? And I thought this is a bit dodgy. When I went to the bank, I took somebody with me as a bodyguard. There were quite a few people around who don't mind banging somebody over the head for that amount of money. Anyway, when I was on the plane, I kept this in my hand all the time. And when I arrived in, it wasn't illegal, it was quite an illegal thing, I was allowed to do it. And when I arrived, the first thing I did was to get rid of this money. It was, but as long as I had it, I held it in my hand, it was precious. So here the Torah is telling us, Yaakov is holding on to the heel of Esau. That indicates in the heel of Esau is that which is of no consequence, it's of no value. Yaakov is holding on to that. That which Esau despised, that is valuable and that is precious to Yaakov Avinu. I also say it's very, very important to know that nobody in this world goes through the experience of this world until it's time to depart. You should all live till 120, but nobody lives forever. Nobody. Everybody comes when they're born for a certain amount of time and then off they go. But during the course of their going through life, there are challenges. Every single person. There's no exception. And challenges in all different areas as one goes through life. Life throws up and all these things happen. And it's all planned before. And as Torah, by the way, is the very essence of our life, Torah must have this element of a challenging situation. So we hear the story of Esau. Esau comes in hungry. How are you going to understand it? Are you going to understand that Yaakov took advantage of the situation? It's challenging. Or are you going to understand it? There's more to it than meets the eye. And so all the stories of the Torah, Yaakov Avinu, who is his main characteristic is emes, true. Yaakov, emes, Yaakov. Each one had a particular others. Avraham Avinu was chesed, and Yitzchak was gevura, Yaakov was emes. If something wasn't emes, Yaakov couldn't tolerate it. One day his mummy comes along and says, Yaakov, I want you to go and swindle your father, make out that you're Esau. I can't do it. It's a challenge. So Rivka says to Mrs. Chazal, by the way, so Rivka says to him, I've got Ruach HaKodesh, and this is what you have to do. So very much against his will, this was a challenge for Yaakov. He had to put on a whole act of deceit. But that was his challenge. Everybody in this world goes through different challenges as life goes on. Even the yeshiva, Baruch goes to yeshiva, how's he going to make out? There's different distractions and so on and so forth. But there's a reason for that. If a person arrives upstairs over after 120 years and he's looking forward to his eternity, to his chelik of olam haba, which goes on forever after. Well, if you're worthy, if you got it, if it's worked for, then it will be precious. If you didn't work for it, if you didn't face any challenges, then it's of little value. So that's the way the world is planned. That's the way Kodesh Baruch Hu runs the world. And this element has to be in Torah as well. You read the story of the Torah, how are you going to understand it? Just on face value? You might come up with the wrong idea. Or are you going to face the terms and understand it as it should be understood? I did want to mention that I came across a couple of interesting stories during the week. It's got nothing to do with the story, but before we look around, we're trying to finish, we won't have time. Everybody knows what's going on with Corona, and it's catching this and that, right? And the authorities wanted to shut down the schools, the Talmud Torah. Now, Talmud Torah is the lifeblood of Klal Yisrael. Right? It says the whole world stands on Torah which children are learning. To shut down all the schools and children shouldn't learn is a major catastrophe. So Chaim said to the Asher Chaim, what should they do? So Chaim Kanievsky said, keep them all open. Now he's a man who understands the situation. It's going to be deadly. It's a very serious situation. He said, keep them open. But they said, but rather the authorities say any school that stays open will have to pay 5,000 shkolim as a fine, and we haven't got money ready to pay the wages. How are we going to manage if we get fined? So the father said, you don't have to worry. You won't have to pay. How? What? And he said, what happened? What happened to the situation? The situation that happened was that they kept the schools open, and there was some loophole in the law which meant that they didn't have to pay. At the time when they opened, they didn't know that. But the Chaim said, don't worry, you won't have to pay. And quite nicely, the school went over. Of course, they took the necessary precautions. Can't be not sensible about the whole thing, but they kept them going, and the man said they didn't have to pay anything. That's one of the latest stories which emerged from Chaim. The whole time there's these type of stories coming all the time. Also I came across an interesting story. It's got nothing to do with the subject, but sometimes a Kodesh Baruch Hu shows himself, and you can see clearly the hashgacha, you can see clearly how Kodesh Baruch Hu's hand is working in the background. A few years ago, there was a terrible atrocity in Har Nof. A couple of Arabs that attacked a shul, had carbine knives and guns, and quite a few very, very chashuv people. One of those who was killed was somebody called Avram Goldberg. That's really, he's really a very friendly fellow. Anyway, so unfortunately, he was killed by these terrorists, and surely Hamnoff decided in his memory they would have a Sefer Torah with him. So it was the yeshiva, and they wrote the Sefer Torah, that he should have something which continues in this world. Now, years later, recently, somebody went to shul on Shabbos afternoon for early mincha, and when it came to Kriyas HaTorah, right, couldn't open the Aron HaKodesh. The Aron HaKodesh was locked. There's no problem. There's two people in the community who are Jew people, and they've all got the key, and they both happen to be there at that mincha. So they said to the first person, "Could we have the key, please?" "I'm very sorry," he said, "but I left it at home." They turned to the other person, and they said, "You've got the key as well. Could we have the key to open your own Kodesh?" He said, "I'm very sorry, it's never happened before, but I've left the key at home." For them to go home and to come back was too far away. It didn't come into question. But there was a Rosh Yeshiva there who says that this week the yeshiva is got a weekend off, right? And there's an Aron HaKodesh there, and I've got the key, so we'll all go. It wasn't far, a few next street, quite near. So they all trooped off to the shul, and they took out the Sefer Torah, and they learned from it. And the Sefer Torah which they used was the one which was dedicated in Avram Goldberg's name. And then the Rosh Hashanah said, "I would like to tell you something, that today is his yahrzeit. Today is his yahrzeit." So it was orchestrated from above that on his yahrzeit they should actually lay from that Sefer Torah. That's just one story in passing. Another interesting story which came up, right? This is not something that happened recently. Esau, if you know, we learned just now that he was prepared to sell his birthright for a pot of lentils. Right? A story is told there was a certain man who had 3 or 4 daughters, and they were getting older by the day, and he didn't know which way to turn. He didn't have a bean to his name, so his wife said to him, "Why don't you go to your Rebbe and ask your Rebbe for a bracha?" So he makes the whole journey to his Rebbe. He says, "What would you like? I've got these daughters that can't even begin to organise a shidduch. I've got no money at all." So the Rebbe said to him, "Look, I haven't got any money to give you, but I'll give you advice. The first deal on your way home, the first deal that comes your way, do the first deal that comes your way, and you'll be successful." So on his way home, he's staying overnight in some lodging place somewhere, and in the evening he sits down to the evening meal, and in the corner there was a whole chevra playing cards, not very serious-minded people. They weren't all together saying they were drinking in the meantime, and it was lively. They saw the yeshiva in the corner, and so the pharaohs thought they would have a bit of fun with him. They said, "Where you been?" And he told him, "I went to my Rebbe. I've got this problem with my daughters and I haven't got any money. I don't know what to do." He said, and the Rebbe said I should take on the first deal that comes my way. So one of them was a bit tipsy. He said, "I've got a deal for you. Yes? I'll sell you my Olam Haba." So they drew up this he didn't have much money on him, this poor man. "How much do you want for it?" He counted his few quarters, he paid, and they gave him a document. And each one went on their way. When this fellow who sold this Olam Haba arrived home, he was telling his wife about what happened. He said, "This fool of a Jew," he said, "I sold him my Olam Haba, and And to this man, his wife said, what? You sold your Olam Haba for a few daughters? I refuse to live with a man who hasn't got a Olam Haba. And she made such a such a dance about the whole thing, right? So he realized, and she says, I demand from you a divorce. I refuse to have a husband who's got no Olam Haba. You must have done a few mitzvahs here and there, and to sell your Olam Haba, it's not on. Anyway, she made such a fuss that he decided he would go and speak to the Rebbe about it and buy it back. So he went to the Rebbe and he took this poor man with him, and the Rebbe said to him, how many daughters have you got? He said, I've got 4 daughters. How much is each one going to cost to marry off? So the fellow says, it cost me a couple of hundred shkalim or whatever. So the Rebbe said, well, that adds up to whatever the amount was, to 10,000 shkalim. He turns to the fellow, this poor man will sell you back your Olam Haba if you pay him 10,000 shkalim. He says, what? I bought it for a few pence. And now you want me to sell it back for such an enormous amount of money. So the Rebbe says to him, okay, you don't want to sell it, it's no cure, the matter's closed. And in the end he was forced to pay out that money in order to carry on living peacefully with his wife. In a way, it's the same thing as Esau. When Esau sold the birthright, he was prepared to sell it for a few pluters, for a pot of lentils. But when it came to the actual crunch at the end, right, with the brachas, he realized how choshev it was. And if you look carefully at Sukkot, you'll see when he found that he lost the birthright, it says, Vayitza, one expression cried out, Sa'aka, Gedola, U'ma'ora ad ma'od. He called out a great and bitter cry, ad ma'od. When Mordechai heard that Haman was going to destroy the whole of Klal Yisrael, it says, Vayitza,